The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping shape it. Welcome back. Hope you're all well. Been a busy few weeks. I was lucky enough to co-host the Drug Science Patient Conference in London a couple of weeks ago. A really great event and a great place to get patients together with doctors and other members of the industry. There was a great vibe in the room, which was very refreshing, as there's unfortunately a lot of infighting in this space, which doesn't feel very productive. It's somewhat understandable given what a lot of patients have to go through, but nonetheless, it was nice to have people listening to each other and offering love and support. I chaired a panel on innovation and a separate panel on our legal rights. Both were very interesting and had some really heartbreaking personal stories. Hopefully some of you were able to catch it online. I'm very much hoping I'll get invited back next year to participate. I want to say a big thanks to the amazing Sarah Sinclair, who was my co-host, as well as Matt Hughes from MedCan. And finally, the wonderful Mags Houston, who was the powerhouse that pulled this all together and delivered a fantastic event. As ever, the show is sponsored by our lovely friends at Lumino. We're talking about medical cannabis in practice today, and Lumino helped to build medical cannabis businesses on the operational side with roles such as patient coordinators. They're also heavily involved with a variety of German businesses too, where much of the action is happening. So, as always, if you need help with HR or recruitment, please do get in touch at luminorecruit.com, and obviously please do mention my name when you do. Now, on with the show. Enjoy. On today's show, we have Franjo Grotenhermen, who has many roles in the medical cannabis space, which he can tell us about in a minute, but he is a medical doctor. He's also a patient, and he's the chairperson at the International Association of Cannabinoid Medicines, which is IACM. Franjo, welcome. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased.
No, real pleasure to have you on. You've got a really interesting story, and IACM is a brilliant organization that's really helping to increase everyone's understanding of the research around cannabis. And we'll come on to talk about that in a minute, but perhaps we can start with just you introducing yourself and your background and what your relationship with cannabis is.
Well, I'm a medical doctor, and when I started to work in hospital, the first few years I was internal medicine and surgery and so on. And then I fell ill. So this is about 33 years ago. And I fell severely ill so that I had to quit hospital. My former work life was away. I had to find something new. This was 1990. And in 1993, by chance, I found this area of cannabis and then of cannabis as medicine. Because in early 1994, there was a German version of a book by Professor Lester Greenstrom from Harvard University, Marijuana the Forbidden Medicine, and it was published in German. And the publisher asked me to write a second chapter on the situation in Germany. And what I did is I didn't write a chapter on the situation in Germany, but just a review on what was known at this time. And at this time in Europe, there were nearly no experts on this issue. And if there are no experts, somebody who's knowing a little bit, poised to be an expert. I was called an expert when I didn't feel like it. But I started to work in this area, and very fascinating. I was chronically ill. I'm usually lying in bed for 22, 23 hours a day since 33 years now. And I found a new reason to live. I could help patients again. I could work scientifically. I could work in the political field, try to change things, make it better for patients to get access. And in the 1990s, there was nearly nothing. There were no laws allowing it. There was no experience from doctors. People didn't know about the issue, so there was much to do. And so I decided to write a book in 1990, which was published in 1997. We founded a German association, the Association for Cannabis Medicine, in 1997. And then, interestingly, I was contacted by a scientist from the UK, Roger Pertwee, who sent me an email and said, "Hey, Franjo, couldn't we do the ACM on an international level? Could you have a scientific association on this issue?" And I found this is very interesting, and I agreed and said, so in the 2000, we founded the International Association for Cannabis Medicine, which was renamed later 2 times, but originally it was the International Association for Cannabis Medicine. And well, I started to have a new office. I started to treat patients again in 2012. I wrote some books, some articles, and this is really my life.
Wow. Yes. No, thank you for sharing that. I always ask this question, but what was your relationship before, with cannabis? And when you were growing up, what was your attitude towards it? Did you know much about it? Were you skeptical about it when you first got involved? What was your approach?
When I was approached in 1993, it was by a friend who was very important for the reintroduction of industrial hemp in Germany, in Europe. Yeah. And at that time, I had no idea that cannabis could have medical value. I had no idea. I had used cannabis a few times as a student. It had no much importance for me in my life. But when I fell to the scientific studies demonstrating the function of the endocannabinoid system, first studies what have been conducted in the 1970s. And so this was so interesting that it completely was a new world, which I was really curious to find my way in it. And I saw the potential, the super potential. There is no molecule such as THC, no other molecule worldwide, which has such broad pharmacological effects and such broad therapeutic potential. Yeah, perhaps CBD is another molecule similar of interest, but this was so fascinating. There's no molecule which can reduce pain, increase appetite, reduce nausea, help with muscle cramps, and so on, and have so diverse medical uses. Yeah, and it's a simple plant. It grows like tomatoes. Yeah, and you don't need large pharmaceutical companies to make it available. Yeah, and it just a decision by, for example, lawmakers to say, when there's a patient, a civilian patient, and there's a plant, we no longer tell him you can't have access to the plant because this is not human. And we are following ideas of what people should be allowed to do to improve their health. And if there is no serious other argument against it, they should have access. So this is the whole battle about this. Yeah, it's about politics, it's about knowledge, it's about informing the public, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I would argue it's also about capitalism as well. The medical system is structured in a certain way for financial reasons, I think, a lot of the time. But we can talk a bit about that a bit later, actually. So, you mentioned IACM, and I think you guys have a conference coming up next year. Is that right?
Yes. In April 2022, from 11 to 13 April, we have our first conference, IACM conference in the UK. And great. We will have it in Aberdeen because Roger Pertwee, whom I talked just a few minutes ago, he became 80 in the last year, and he is an eminent researcher. I think that many people from the UK even know him very well because he's not a clinician. Yeah, he's not in the forefront, but he has done research in the cannabis area since the 1970s. Yeah, and he's a very important person with regard to the detection of the endocannabinoid system pharmacology, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. I am hopefully interviewing him in a couple of weeks' time. And I know he was a collaborator of Professor Meshulam as well, who has been on the show a couple of times before he passed away. So, yeah, that sounds like it'll be an amazing conference next year.
We want to honor his work. Yeah. Because
absolutely.
He deserves it so much. He's a very polite, not very extroverted, but he has contributed so much to our knowledge, which we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it needs to be celebrated. That's good. Cool. Okay. Well, look, we'll talk a bit about sort of general cannabis research. We covered it a fair bit on the show ourselves, but I think your viewpoint and your experience is really important here, because I think you've said you've treated sort of several thousand people or have been aware of the conditions of lots of people and interactions with cannabis. So I think you've got probably some of the best knowledge available to talk about this. Let's start with a very broad question, but what do you think distinguishes cannabis from other substances that can be used medically?
I used a term to describe the problematic situation of cannabis as a medicine and a special role. And I taught this a word, cannabis dilemma. The cannabis dilemma arises from two issues. The first issue is there is absolutely easy access to cannabis because it's a simple plant which could grow anywhere. Yeah. So you don't need a pharmaceutical company to produce these molecules or this herb to give help to patients. So it's very easy accessible if there weren't the laws. And the dilemma is that the governments have to decide how to deal with this problem. It's easy accessible, but it's a narcotic. And how can we deal with it? Can we deny this herb to patients? And with what reasons? And with what exceptions? And the second issue is that it does not need only 2 or 3 large clinical trials to see the whole potential of cannabis-based medicines. It's not like the opioids, for example. Huh? You make a large study with opioids in pain, you see it works, and then you have opioids are working in pain. But if you have 50 or more indications for a certain substance, such as cannabis, you have to conduct dozens of large clinical trials to get the whole potential of this plant. And many of these studies will never be conducted, or in 10 years or 20 years. And between now and this 20 years, what can we tell patients? Can we tell them, well, let's wait for 20 years, then you come back when we have the clinical trials? So this is another dilemma. And the governments also have to deal with this issue. Yeah, can we deny patients such a treatment? So these are the two issues which distinguishes cannabis plants or the medical use of cannabis from other pharmaceuticals that are used in medicine.
Yeah, and I think to develop that theme, it seems to me, and something that's been covered on the show a lot, is the fact that there are so many compounds in the plant. And I guess the traditional pharmaceutical model is very much about focusing on a single compound. How do you kind of see that situation? Because there's lots of cannabinoids, but also terpenes and flavonoids and lots of things in the cannabis plant.
Yeah, in the beginning, the focus was nearly solely on THC. For example, the first clinical studies in the 1970s, they were all conducted with THC. And then there were some THC derivatives, such as levonorgestrel or nabilone or something. It was very much focused on THC. In only one group in Brazil, they worked on CBD in the 1970s. Nobody worked on CBD, but only this group, yeah? And they laid the ground for the research which has been conducted in the past 2 decades on CBD. Well, the focus was on THC, and then this changed slightly when other cannabinoids came into the focus as well. And then, for example, CBD, and in later times also cannabidiol and some other cannabinoids, cannabidivarine, tetrahydrocannabidivarine. So there are some other cannabinoids of great value also, or maybe great value. And then we experience that some people tell us that, well, pure THC, I can't stand it very much, but the whole plant, it's much better for me. It helps me better. It has less side effects. This is not a general issue, but we see it in many patients that patients tell us, well, the whole extracts or the whole plant is better than the single cannabinoid. It has less side effects and works better and so on. And yes, we have to be very open to this whole development. Yeah. For example, when I started in the 1990s, I was also focusing only on THC. I thought, well, cannabis is the transporter of THC and nothing else. Yeah. So it is very important that we as doctors or scientists, that we listen to the patients who tell you, well, but the extract does work better, and in my case. And I also realized that, for example, some patients, they tell me, well, just prescribe me any variety. It works for me anyway. And others tell me, well, I need these 2 varieties. They are better than the other 50s. Yeah. And these are experiences of great importance for me as a medical doctor when I work with patients, to be open to the new information I'm getting there. So when I'm treating patients, I regard them as experts if they use cannabis for some time. They have become an expert on the use of cannabis in their body with them. And I have the experience of, for example, I treated about 4,000 patients with cannabis. I have also my experience. And then two experienced and two experts come together and try to find out how to go on.
A very great attitude to have. I was hosting some panels at the patient conference. We had a patient conference in London last week, and there was some really terrible stories of people who'd gone to see their doctors and the reaction of the doctor when they told them that they wanted to use cannabis as a treatment. There was very much amongst the doctors who were not keen. There was an attitude of, well, there's no evidence for it. And it was an interesting question around the nature of evidence and what people find compelling and what they don't. And what you're talking about is real world evidence, right? You know, the experiences of patients and who are talking back to you and telling you the things that they've experienced and how it works for them. How does that sit against like clinical trials, which are, you know, obviously very kind of tightly controlled, etc.?
Yes, clinical trials are very important because they finally convince more doctors that there is some value. We have a kind of, well, we are proud of evidence-based medicine and medicine, that we are not only working on our own experience, but can use the experience got from clinical trials and can be used worldwide as a basis. But since cannabis can usually not be patented, it cannot be, it's a natural product. So the wish of pharmaceutical companies to do clinical trials is not so large. Yeah, because I know some companies would like to do clinical trials with cannabis flowers. But on the other side, they tell me, well, you invest 10 millions in a clinical trial. And the other companies say, well done. You can also use it as a proof that our herb is working. So this is a rather difficult situation. And you have to find ways between clinical trial and real world experience. Both have to have their importance. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is when it comes to experience of patients, the patients are also with other treatments the last to decide if a drug works or not. For example, if you have a depression, your doctor may try an antidepressant, but you as a patient decide if it works or not and tells your doctor, well, it's nice, it lasts 4, 6 weeks, but it didn't work. And the doctor says, okay, we will try something else. So real life or real world experience is a daily issue for doctors in the medical practice. So it's not so much difference to what you are doing with cannabis.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a good example that you use because, yeah, they say that, you know, if it's not working, come back, or if it's not working, we might need to change the dose. You know, you need to get that feedback from the patient regardless of the type of medicine. So yeah, it's a very good comparison. Okay, cool. You know, as you said, you've treated lots of people with cannabis. What conditions are you seeing the most sort of encouraging efficacy and research for?
Well, I told you of about more than 50 indications, but we can perhaps summarize it to a few groups. The most groups are 5 groups. There is pain of different origin, for example, neuropathic pain, migraine, everything, different sorts of pain. Then there are neurological disorders, such as spasticity and multiple sclerosis or Tourette syndrome or so, or epilepsy, neurological diseases, because it is relaxant, muscle relaxant, and so on. Then there is the whole issue of nausea, appetite loss in cancer chemotherapy, HIV, hepatitis C, and so on. So this is the third. Then we have chronic inflammatory conditions, such as colitis ulcerosa or Crohn's disease or rheumatic arthritis, and so on. And then the fifth large group is psychiatric diseases, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, ADHD, depression, and so on. Yeah, so these are the major 5 areas. But when we look closer, we see other areas of interest. For example, dermatology. It works in hyperhidrosis, acne inversa, psoriasis. So there are 5 great groups, big groups of diseases, but there are other minor groups of diseases which are also much of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess as more research happens, I guess we'll develop the cannabinoids in a different way to maybe look at different treatments for topical treatments, for example, or, everyone usually instinctively thinks about inhalation as the method of delivery, but there's obviously a lot of different ways you can administer it.
Yes, indeed. Most patients, they prefer inhalation, but oral use is increasing. We see it in the US or North America, Canada, US, that edibles are very popular, becoming more popular, which has not been so popular in the recreational area, but in medical use, it's very, for Germany, we use often extracts, cannabis extracts, drops. And you talked about topical use, for example, CBD creams, or in North America, we see also THC creams. For example, if you have an inflamed area of your skin or something like that, or it may be used to give it topical. Or since the 1990s, people are talking about having eye drops with THC or something like that. It never happened. There are no eye drops on the market, but it is of course a potential. Yeah, or we see rectal support or vaginal, and we see, of course, in the last years some new developments with regard to application administration. Yes. Most, of course, being inhalation with my patients, many of them using oral preparations, and a few topical. This is really, yeah.
Yeah. Again, on Friday, one of the things that we talked about was the challenges of medicating children, for example, because a number of the methods are not suitable for children, particularly small children. So the whole development around how you get it into the body and so it works in the right place at the right time is, a whole area of medicine, I suppose. I mean, a lot of people, enthusiastic people in the industry, sort of sometimes claim that cannabis can cure everything, which it can't. What is there kind of less evidence for that people are kind of using it for?
Well, cannabis may be used in a broad spectrum of diseases, I told you. This is the one side. On the other side, it often doesn't work. So clinical studies, for example, they show that 1 person in 3 or 1 person in 5 is profiting from cannabis as a medicine in chronic pain, neuropathic pain. So there are more patients where it doesn't work than patients where it works. So often people come to me and say, well, Dr. Grotenhermen, you are my last chance to get you some relief and so on. And I say, stop 1 moment. We will try it out and hopefully it works, but we don't know. So this is also one reason why some doctors are so skeptical. Because as a doctor, you may try, for example, okay, this patient, we have no pain medication for him. I will try cannabis for the first time in my life. And then you try it and it doesn't work. And you tell yourself, well, the medical value of cannabis is obviously exaggerated. Yeah, it's not this one a drug. And then he tries it again and it doesn't work again. So this has no worth. Yeah, this cannabis is nothing. So these are the extremes which you may experience. And you have, as a doctor, you have to know both. Yeah, on the one side, that it can work in many, many diseases, but in many cases it doesn't work at all. Or people, they don't tolerate it. For example, a few days ago, I had a patient with anxiety and depression. And she told me, well, I've read that cannabis may be relaxing and may reduce anxiety. And unfortunately, in this patient, THC caused an increase of anxiety. She didn't experience what she hoped to experience. And for other patients said, well, my life had changed completely after I visited your practice and now I'm using it and I can go back to work again. And so it's a wonder drug. So these are the extremes which you as a doctor experience both. Yeah. If you have many patients and don't give up after the first patient.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And I mean, that, again, another good illustration that it's personalized in a way, whether your body is able to kind of get the benefit or not. So I guess one of the assessments you must make as a doctor is, what is the risk profile around cannabis? Because obviously because you're growing up with the prohibition, there's a lot of stigma and maybe outsized fears around cannabis. What would you say around the risk profile of cannabis to try it, and it might work, it might not work for you?
Well, a good example, a good citation is that of the Institute of Medicine of the USA in the 1990s. They wrote a book on the medical use of marijuana. And they wrote, for example, that the side effects of cannabis use are usually in the range of what we tolerate with other medications. So this is a general rule, yeah? Cannabis is not beneficial for everyone. It may have side effects. There may be contraindications, and you have to look at interactions with other medications. For example, it may also worsen the outcome. For example, if you use it in cancer and you use it in combination with a cancer drug, where cannabis may indeed be, of disadvantage. Yeah, so you have to carefully look at this. When we talk about contraindications, we only have two. This is allergic reactions to the THC or other compounds of the medication you're giving, and acute schizophrenia. These are the two absolute contraindications where you shouldn't use cannabis. And then we have some relative contraindications. For example, pregnancy, because the effect on THC or CBD, both cannabis may have an effect on the fetus. It is not very strong, but you can measure it. Yeah. So if it's possible, you don't use cannabis when you're pregnant. But I tell it a relative contraindication because there may be some diseases which can only be treated with cannabis, for example, severe nausea during pregnancy. Nausea is also very stressing to the fetus. Yeah. It may be more stressful than experience the THC, which comes from the mother. So you have to weigh the risk and benefits. Yeah. The same is true with children. You talked about the difficulty to give it to children, especially when it comes to THC. With CBD, it's easier because it has not its psychological effects. But we are also treating children with THC. But you have to carefully weigh the risk and benefits. Yeah. The risk is that THC is given to a person with a brain that has not been developed finally, and there may be interaction with THC when it comes to the development of the brain. But if you have very severe neurological disorders or have cancer chemotherapy, then it's absolutely justified to give THC and to give the child a better life than without. Yeah. Relative contraindications may also be cardiovascular diseases. You have to be very careful when there has been a heart attack, for example, or severe personality disorders, with one exception, because borderline personality disorder, THC is working very, very well. It's not a relative contraindication. It's one of my favorite conditions for the use of THC, because with borderline personality disorder, we have nearly no standard medication. We don't have something. And so many people with borderline, they tell me, when I use cannabis, I feel so relieved. I have not this pressure with this, which is characterized for borderline, is that people self-hurt themselves with a knife in their arms or something like that. Yeah. And if they use cannabis, they tell you that this urge to do something against your own body, it's diminishing, and we are relaxing. So there are some relative contraindications, and where we have carefully weigh the risks and benefits, which you have to do anyway, but you have to have a closer look, and very few absolute contraindications, which was different 20 years ago. We talked about more absolute contraindication. For example, we were very skeptical when it came to psychiatric diseases, because we knew cannabis may exaggerate, maybe worsen psychiatric symptoms, and so don't use it in psychiatry. But this image has changed in the last years because we see that it may worsen some symptoms, it may improve others.
Yeah, there's loads there, isn't there? And it's really interesting around the self-harming aspects, and I didn't know that there's, in certain conditions, has been shown to reduce the need for that.
It is in general a good medication to reduce the urge some people feel. For example, in Tourette syndrome, people have the urge to shout out or move the head or something like that. And this urge is decreasing. Or with obsessive compulsivity disorders, there's also an urge to do something, to think about something, to do something, to again and again wash your hands, again and again wash your hands, wash your hands. And this urge to do this is reduced. And this is the same as borderline. You have an internal urge to do something which is not good for you. And this urge is reduced because you are simply relaxed mentally and physically.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. Thank you. And so as we come to toward the end, sadly in this world, most people, certainly over a certain age, have a few different things going on and maybe often taking other medications as well. Are there any interactions with other medications, specific medications, that are problematic with cannabis?
Yeah. Well, we have two kinds of interactions. We have interaction which we call pharmacodynamic. This is an interaction which is based on the effects of the two drugs. For example, if you take something which is sedating, for example, benzodiazepine or alcohol or something like that, and you take it together with cannabis, it may increase sedation. Yeah, this is pharmacodynamic. Or if you take opioids for pain relief and add cannabis, this might add the pain relieving effect. This is pharmacodynamic interaction. And on the other side, we have what we call pharmacokinetic interactions. That is an interaction on the absorption of the other drug, of the degradation of the other drug in the liver, for example. Yeah. And the main focus in this area is indeed if there are interactions on the degradation of cannabinoids and the other drugs in the liver. For example, if you have one enzyme in the liver, let's take CYP3A2 or something like that, or CYP3A1, and another drug also needs the same enzyme, there may be a concurrence, and this may cause some interaction. Yeah. And what is most relevant, I think, is the interaction of CBD with other anti-epileptic drugs. Yeah, because CBD is given in high doses to children and adults. And if you use other clobazam or something like that, other anti-epileptics, there may be an interaction on the level of this medication in the blood. And so you have to measure this. Yeah. Another interaction which may be of relevance is immunotherapy and cancer therapy. Because immunotherapy is done to help the body to destroy the cancer cells. And so you shouldn't use a drug which is reducing the activity of the immune system. And this is true for opioids and also cannabinoids. They may reduce the activity of the immune system. That's why they are anti-allergic and anti-inflammatory. And you want to avoid it when you have cancer medication which is based on immunotherapy. Yeah. And these are two of the major issues that you have to have in mind when it comes to pharmacokinetic interactions.
Brilliant. Thank you. I mean, a really good way of breaking it all down for us. I appreciate that. Thank you, Franjo. We've come to the end now. So, I mean, we could talk a lot more about this, and it's really useful to just have the overarching summary and the benefit of all of your experience as well. So thank you for sharing it today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. And yeah, I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I'm a commercial lawyer and I work with a number of cannabis businesses in the UK. If you need help with commercial contracts, data protection, employment, corporate, or other business legal needs, please do get in touch with me via LinkedIn or at anuj@canvas.global.